Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I'm going to continue with part 3 in my series of videos where I'm going to walk you through how to set up your Synology NAS perfectly the very first time. Now in this series of videos, this is probably going to be the deepest one of all of the parts in this series. Today we're going to talk about backup and synchronization, probably one of the main reasons a number of you have purchased a Synology NAS. Now, before we go into the multifaceted ways in which you can back up and synchronize your storage between your client devices like your mobile and desktop devices or the NAS itself and all the ways in between, it's worth touching on a few things. Number one, along the bottom of the screen there are chapters. You've probably come to this video because you want to synchronize with your Synology NAS in a very specific way to your tailored needs. And each one of those chapters describes a slightly different way to do it. So head to the one that sounds most appropriate to you. Secondly, it's worth touching on the difference between synchronization and backups because they're not actually the same thing. And I think a lot of users, myself included when I talk about these things, often muddle them up or discuss them in a way where really one is more appropriate than the other. So let's break those down. A backup is when you are sending data, and stay with me, I know this sounds condescending, but it's important. A backup is when you send a copy of the data to another location, and more importantly, that location remains in both of those places. That means, for example, if you're sending data from mobile phones, all the photos you take, and then you start running out of room on your phone, and you've sent that data over to the NAS, and then you delete it from your phone, the NAS is no longer a backup of that data. It becomes the only copy of that data, and it might as well have been on your mobile phone on its own in the first place. So having a backup is when that data remains in both locations. Now, that sounds a lot like synchronization, right? Synchronization is very similar, but with a few different caveats. Number one, synchronization is when you're bridging a connection between those two devices, and you can choose it to go in either direction. On top of that, synchronization is what allows a lot of users that are, accessing the NAS on the local area network or remotely around the world to be able to access the same area of storage from multiple different storage at once. Synchronization allows lots of people to use their devices and share the storage appropriately while sending all their data to it. And I know that sounds a lot like backing up, but there are those key differences of directions of the way the data is going and also how the data is maintained. But it will make a lot more sense if we start dipping our toes directly into it. So going by my notes, probably the most important tool that I want to talk about more than any other is Synology Drive. It somewhere sits between both synchronization and backup. Now, synchronization in terms of this desktop here, and again we could go on about the mobile application, which I've already reviewed across a couple of different videos. So if you want to learn more about the mobile application for both Android and iOS, you can check my video out that should be linked in the description. When it comes to utilizing Synology Drive allows you, and using this as a great example here, if we head into my folders here, you'll see on the left hand side of the screen a folder here marked as Synology Drive. I'm synchronized with the Synology NAS in this office. If I go into these office spaces here, I can open this up, and within this folder you can see lots of ticks, you can see lots of cloud icons, but ultimately this allows me to see the contents of the NAS. But more importantly, if we were to highlight a huge number of folders here, we can select that, and you're able to see by looking at the properties that although there is 1.02 gig of data on the NAS, I'm only occupying half a gig here locally. And the same goes if we go on an even bigger scale. So for example, if we right click there, go to properties on this Synology synchronized folder between my local PC and the NAS, you can see there is 2.46 terabytes of data on the NAS, but only occupying just under 400 gig on my local machine. Synchronization allows me to not only see the contents of the NAS, but allows me to see it on quite an interesting level. It allows me to see individual files and folders. It allows me to see thumbnails sometimes. And ultimately, if I choose, I can say, right, I want, for example, all of these files here, I want them synchronized on my local system. So you would go into the Synology Drive icon there and say, I want to pin that data always on my local system, or I can free up all of that space and make sure the copy of it remains there on the NAS. But remember, it's only a copy as far as you've got two knocking around there, hence the difference between synchronization and backups there. Now, Synology Drive is a great tool to allow you to bridge connections across a multitude of devices. So let me talk you through exactly how to set Synology Drive up. Head into the package center and then scroll down or just search for the word drive and you will find the Synology Drive server. Go ahead and install that. It's actually made up of a couple of different components, and when they are installed they make up two items. These, or three technically: Synology Drive Share Sync, something we'll touch on in another video, and Synology Drive Admin Console. Now, when you open up Synology Drive for the first time, it will open up in your web browser like so, and it will say a few things. On the bottom right, as you can see, it's recommending you get the client application for mobile and desktop services. On top of that, you'll have the folders there on the left. Now, the next thing you need to do is to work out what parts of the NAS you want to share with all of these connected devices on Synology Drive, and for that, you need Synology Drive Admin Console. In here, it will allow you to see, for example, whether you want to create a team folder. A team folder is a folder that is specific to Synology Drive and allows all of your connected users to bridge together and work together on a similar project. But if you've got pre-existing shared folders, something we've covered in the previous video, you can select these shared folders and make these accessible here on Synology Drive. You can choose whether you want to create versions that you can roll back over time. Do be aware they will take up a little bit of space on your system. On top of that, you can add additional security. So for example, images, you can make sure that images are watermarked. You can make sure that some of the limitations that users have access to a lot of these files are configurable. So you can make sure that maybe they've got only read access and not read and write access there. You've even got new features coming into Synology Drive, such as remote erase, which, depending on your time of watching this, will have been rolled in. But bear in mind, when you're activating the additional features, you will need a Synology account in order to do those. But moving forward, and we will do a whole video on Synology Drive, much like we did with the Synology app there, the mobile app there. If you've downloaded that Synology tool there in the background, what you need to do is go ahead and install that client app. Remember, the Synology download section will allow you to download lots of different clients, and the one we want to look at is the Synology Drive client. Once it's installed, you'll either find it on your list of range of applications or on your taskbar, and again, this is Windows centric, go in to the Windows Drive tool. Now, what the window you will see is it will invite you to add a new NAS. Now, when you're adding a NAS, you've got two options. You can either add the local area network identity that the system has, or if you want to enable remote access, you will need to go in and create a Synology external connection by creating a Synology account and bridging that device with your account. When doing so, it will allow you via Quick Connect to synchronize with this NAS remotely if you choose to. However, if you only intend to allow the local area network to synchronize with the NAS rather than remote access, you can go ahead and just use the local IP. Now, at the moment, that's a NAS that I've already got in my local area network, but if I select another Synology NAS, I can either add that local area remote access credential via the Synology Quick Connect external, or you can click the spyglass and it will scan your local area network to find Synology NAS systems, or you can just manually enter that number if you choose. So in my case, I'm going to add 192.168. 1164, and then you have to add those credentials there. Once you've added those credentials, you can choose whether you want to enable SSL data encryption. That will depend also on whether you're using a Let's Encrypt certificate. Then click Next, and it will find the NAS on the local area network. It'll also ask if you want to switch to Quick Connect, because that again is the means with which you can have both in-house and external synchronization between those client devices via Synology Drive. You can add that later if you choose. Next up, you'll be invited to choose which folders you want to synchronize both on the local system and on the NAS between each of those individual synced clients with Synology Drive. So for example, from the NAS here, I can click change, and any folders that I've added to my Synology Drive support will appear here. We can go ahead and create brand new folders if we choose to within those subcategories, or we can head back into the Synology NAS with the Synology Drive admin console and enable some of these other folders. So for example, click enable there, click OK, and now we're enabling it for its access, and we can change some of those limitations and rules. And if we head back into our Synology Drive client, we'll be able to find that our new folders are activated there for us to use. So for example, I'm going to synchronize the video folder there on the Synology NAS and click OK. Now on the local system, we choose which folder on our local machine we want to synchronize with that folder on the NAS. So for example, if we want to synchronize our videos folder, we can do that. Alternatively, we can go ahead and select a new folder. So if we go ahead and click change, we can select any folder on the system that we choose to use. But another thing I will also highlight is this option down here, create an empty Synology Drive folder. Synology include this option for the sake of convenience for novice users that want to be able to identify a folder. However, often this can break certain rulings and synchronization. What do I mean by that? Take, for example, my footage folder here. This is a footage folder I use with 3 different video editing softwares, a couple of photo editing softwares. Now, all of the paths and directories I have got for projects and stuff I've done in the past are all saved to certain locations. So, for example, if we look at this template file here that's utilized in Power Director, we're able to see here where the location is users Robbie desktop footage. Now, if I was to try and synchronize this folder on a new machine, where it synchronized all of these folders with a brand new machine with Synology Drive, the last thing I want to do is introduce a Synology Drive folder into that layout of folders. If I have that box ticked, what will happen is it will synchronize all of my footage on a new machine behind the folder of Synology Drive, which will break all of my established saved pathways for any file and folder. So if that sounds like something that's going to affect your work, untick that option and just make sure to send the data to one of the sub-root headings. So in my case here, I'm going to go ahead and synchronize with my videos folder here. And that means videos folder on both systems is now synchronized if I choose to. On-demand file sync is something we just talked about there. So again, when you're looking at a folder, for example, this one here, and you right click, Synology Drive's contextual options will allow you to create a shareable link for that file if you choose, which can be password protected and date protected as well. On top of that, if you choose to, you can go ahead and, as mentioned, pin that file locally if you choose. Stop synchronization of a very specific folder if you don't want to continue synchronizing it. Pin a local copy, which means that that data will always reside on the local machine, or free up space and delete the data on your client, Windows or Mac system, while simultaneously keeping it on the NAS there. On-demand sync allows you, as shown earlier, to see the full length and depth of the data on your NAS via your Windows, PC or mobile devices file manager without occupying any physical space. It's a feature I do recommend you use. And now, as you can see by clicking done, we've now added synchronization on this NAS between my local PC here and the synchronized folder there on the NAS. And if we look in the background of Synology Drive, we can see we've now established that synchronization. And on my PC, if we go into the videos folder, as you'll see, now it's starting to synchronize. We're starting to see those ticks, starting to see synchronization between that folder and that of the NAS. Now, before we move on to the subject of backups, I think it would be remiss to not at least spend just a tiny bit more time talking about another way in which you would synchronize the storage on your NAS with your local system remotely. In our previous video, we did talk a little bit about mapped network drives. That is, when you bolt on the storage of your NAS via those shared folders we created to be visible on our local machine there. Now, as good as that sounds, unfortunately there is a lot, and I really do mean a lot of different kinds of software which does not play nice with mapped network drives, otherwise known as IP protocol there. So For those particularly video editing software, I will add, they will insist on only using drives known as local drives that are inside the PC or Mac system you use. So how do you trick your local PC or Mac system into seeing a NAS as if it's local storage? You can, as mentioned, use Synology Drive to synchronize, but the problem with the synchronization is it will still be limited to the folder, so you can have your video editing software pulling from the folder that you're synchronizing with, which is still a local folder that's synchronized with the NAS, but synchronization on a folder that you're editing on simultaneously can occasionally lead to inconsistencies, as a file that you're editing that can change once it's synchronizing with the NAS can be problematic there. What it's recommended for, if you want true high performance video editing, for example, software to work with a NAS, it is highly recommended to use a system known as iSCSI, Targets and LUNs, known on the Synology side as the SAN Manager. Now I'm going to skip over a lot of this because in our previous videos where we're talking to you how to use the Synology NAS, I did make a full setup guide for setting up an iSCSI, Target and LUN on your local machine and on the NAS. And frankly, this 11-minute video covers everything you're going to need to know. So I recommend checking that out in the description. But in brief, what you need to do is head into the iSCSI Manager and create a pure area of storage. This pure area of storage, known as a LUN, is completely separate from the rest of the NAS system. That completely separate area of storage is then connected to your local system via an iSCSI initiator. Windows have it natively. Mac users, you will have to use a third-party iSCSI initiator. Then, within the iSCSI initiator, you need to add the identity of your NAS via that IP there at the top. It will then find it as an available area of storage, and then on your machine, you go into disk management, and then you would find that remote access area of storage appearing as if it was a local drive. And then from there, you can bolt on that local drive here like you would any other drive inside your system, allowing you to edit onto this pure storage, which happens to be remote. But just bear in mind, there's a lot more to it, and I strongly recommend checking out that video where I go into a huge amount of detail of setting that up. Now we move on to the tricksy subject of backups. Unlike synchronization, which is going to largely be involving a third-party client and the NAS kind of having synchronized change one way or the other data, backups are going to be your bread and butter. And if you don't have a good backup routine in place that fits your workflow, then for all you know, for all of the months, weeks, months or years that your NAS is running, your backup is not as useful or as reliable or as restorable as you need. Now, these backups are going to be broken down in this section into 3 different versions. Backing up from the NAS to a local USB drive, the easiest and most affordable, backing up the NAS to a cloud service, and finally backing up the NAS to a NAS. Now, the most by far useful tool you're going to be utilizing during the course of this is Hyper Backup. Hyper Backup allows very easy, manageable and intuitive backup operations between your NAS and the cloud, USB and another NAS. It has seen improvements in recent years, and alongside not only object level storage backups, otherwise known as file folder, they've now added backups to back up the entire Synology NAS system right the way down to system configuration, users, paths, shares and more, available in Hyper Backup as well as LUNs as well. Another form of backup, which I'm going to skirt around because it's going to need to have its own dedicated video, is known as Synology Active Backup Suite. Active Backup Suite, available in varying different versions here at the top, is the more enterprise flavor of backups there. Enterprise or Active Backup for Business allows you to back up on a much larger scale. You will need to have an activated Synology account for this, and we have done a dedicated video on Active Backup, but Active Backup allows whole system backups externally. So if you want to back up your Windows PC on an image restoration level, that's the whole system backup, Mac as well, comparable and in many ways superior to Apple Time Machine, you can use Active Backup for that. Third-party servers, virtual machines, all of these are bridged together. Just bear in mind you will need a Synology account in order to use it, and I've already made a dedicated video just to this one tool alone. But when it comes to more lower scale accessible forms of backup, then that is where Hyper Backup comes in. So let's start with that USB backup. USB backups come in two different main ways on the Synology NAS. If you are someone that regularly uses an external hard drive or SSD, or even simple, more affordable external USB drives now that are available with SSD storage up to 1 TB, and some of them running 10 gig USB there, chances are you might be doing jobs and, maybe partner work, maybe you're a college student, and what you want to do is come back every day, take your USB, slam it in your NAS and let it back up to the system. For that sort of backups, this is where you would use USB copy. You can run import photo and video only, which means that when you connect that USB, it will either manually or automatically, as soon as the USB connects if you choose, back up just photos and video if you choose. So again, we've got a USB connected to this right now, so you could do USB task photo. And then from there, if you choose, select the source. Again, there's our USB connected to the system. Then select the destination on the NAS that you want it to go to. So in this case, we would go with photos. Click select, and then from there you can choose to copy data whenever that USB is connected, specifically that USB. Automatically eject it when it's done. So if your USB has a light on it, you'll know that it's done. And you can choose to completely delete the data from the USB as soon as it backs up onto the NAS if you choose to. Whether you want to do that is really up to you. On top of that, when you move along, you can do that USB, and then boom, every time that drive's connected, you've got that backup running fine there. I'm just going to delete that task for us. Next, a data import. Exactly the same principle, but this time it's all data that's on there. You can even curate it ever so slightly. So say we go for data backup, and then from there select the source, and we'll go for the whole USB as the source there. The destination, we might choose a brand new one. We can even create a brand new one, call this one data. Again, this is not a shared folder. Oh, I haven't given myself enough protocol for that. But let's go ahead and just choose homes. From there, from the destination, you can choose multi-version, mirroring, or incremental. Multi-version means that every time there's a backup, it will maintain versions, so you can roll back if need to an older USB backup there. Alternatively, mirroring is so that as mentioned with synchronization, the USB and the storage you're sending it to on the NAS are always identical. And finally, an incremental, which means the data is always being added from the USB and just piling up all the extra data, while simultaneously the USB every time can have the data deleted, and it won't just mirror the USB every single time. It means you've got the USB adding to the pile of storage every time it's connected there. Now if we look at the multi-version backup there, you can set some of the backup rotation, how many versions you want to keep over time. Obviously they will occupy more space on the NAS when you do so, and once again you can choose whether you want this to be automated, set to a schedule, a certain time of day, and more. You can even break down into the types of medium files that you want to go for, and even add prefixes and exceptions rules that ensures that you have certain filter to certain file types that you may not wish to back up, or some more than others. And it's as simple as that. That's how easy it is to create a data backup there. And finally, you've got data export. And this is another one, but working in the other direction. And this is one where every time you connect it to the NAS and you press the button on the system, that backup will once again take place. But this is a physically targeted and actioned backup. This features all of the same options and configuration choices as the previous data backup from the USB, but this time it's working from the NAS onto the USB. So, for example, maybe you've got an external USB drive that's working as one of your backups. I don't recommend that you keep it permanently connected, but for some users that works. Have the USB connected, and then periodically, either by physically tapping the copy button on the front of your NAS, or at a certain time of day, have a backup of the NAS running onto that USB there. And that's something you can run once again with either incremental backups, mirrored synchronization style backups, or running that multi-version control with all of those same options and filters all applicable. Now, the majority of those advantages in USB backup are afforded to Hyper Backup. So what exactly is it that makes Hyper Backup superior to USB backup? Well, as you may have already guessed, whereas USB backup is just for USB drives, Hyper Backup is for everything. So for example, when we go for folders and packages here, we click next and we've got several options. Notwithstanding that we can, if we choose, use a USB drive. On top of that, as a local shared USB, we can choose to back up to Synology's cloud platform, C2, which is a subscription cloud service. There is a free trial period if you want to try that out. We can also back up to another NAS that I'll show you in a moment. We can also back up to those cloud services. So for example, if we use Google Drive as a cloud service, we've got our disposable Google Drive here that we use here on the channel. Click allow, it goes in, you agree to allow that synchronization. You then select a folder that you want to synchronize from. So these are the folders here on that cloud service. So we can choose to, for example, DS920 plus photos there. We then select the directory that we want to utilize, and that directory that's going to be created. We can either choose export to a local shared folder, or we can go and carry on with what we're doing here. Then from there, so that's the destination running onto the cloud synchronization. Then we choose the folder on the local NAS system that we want to back up towards the cloud. So for example, we would go for the photos folder there. From there, we can choose if we want to back up application data that is relevant as well. And then finally, add some of those key important details, such as, again, do you want this to run on a schedule? Do you want to run an integrity check afterwards? Do you want to, and we'll see that in just a moment, run certain filters? Do you want to run that rotation system as well, as mentioned earlier on? And once that's done, you'll be able, every time you want to create that backup from the NAS onto the cloud service there. And again, it will be dependent on your internet connection, and I would recommend running a synchronization like a backup like this one at 1 a.m. when everyone's asleep, as it will saturate your internet bandwidth, and depending on your network setup, it may also oversaturate your network as well. So just be aware of that. Once it's ready, you can monitor it, make changes to it within Hyper Backup here. So you can go ahead, if you choose, edit and change some of the settings and configuration choices you've made. And that's really as straightforward as that is. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that backup there and go into some of the other backup configuration options that you can run from on the Synology NAS. So we've looked at that cloud backup there, and again, we can also go with a NAS to NAS backup. So, for example, if you want to back up to another Synology NAS, you won't be surprised to learn that it's actually a great deal easier to back up onto another Synology NAS. You can look on the local area network, find another Synology NAS if you choose. It will scan, find other Synology NASs, and you can enter the information there to establish a connection between them to back up one Synology to the other. You will need to enter the port identifier that you're going to need to know for the destination NAS. On top of that, if you do have login credentials, you are going to have to enter them there. A lot of users will use this feature and facility to have another Synology NAS on the local area network to back up towards. Now, what if you want to use a third-party backup choice? Well, once again, go in and this time scroll to the bottom and select the option rsync. rsync will synchronize with third-party NAS systems. It will also work with Synology, but it's nice to have that option. And again, you can go for versioning if you choose. Now, it's important whether you're going to use a Synology NAS for rsync or you're going to be using a third-party rsync server to not only know the address, but log into that system and enable rsync. So for example, if we make our way here onto my QNAP NAS, on my QNAP NAS here in the background, I can go ahead, log into its own credentials and settings, and then from there I can enable rsync. That's going to be very important that on the destination server that you want to back up towards, that you enable rsync. So in my case, I've gone into services, I've enabled rsync, I've put on a password as well, which is going to be very, very important. So now we know that this NAS is on this IP, 192.168.1.2.1.2. We're going to save that there. We have to remember that port 873. And if we make our way back into this NAS here, we can go ahead, enter that IP of the destination NAS, choose whether we want encrypted protocol, put in the port name, enter those login credentials that we created to establish an rsync connection. Then we can choose if we wish to look at which folder we want to synchronize with. So for example, we're going to go for the media folder, that's there in the distance. The directory that it's going to create on that destination NAS, it's going to be named there. And then we click next. It will then check and verify that synchronization. And once again, just like the other backup methodology, choose which folders on your local NAS you want to backup. From there, if you want to backup app data, from there, add, again, rules of when you want it to run. Do you want integrity checks, names of it, and more. You can even use compression. And then from there, click next, whether you want to have rotational versioning and whether you want how many you want to keep over time. And then from there, it's done. And as you can see, now when I click done, it's going to establish a NAS to NAS backup from my Synology NAS onto that third-party server. And again, if you want to use a Synology NAS, you can use either the dedicated Synology NAS option or use Synology via rsync there. The steps are largely identical. Now, it's worth remembering that all of the backup methodology we've largely covered in this part of the video has been about file folder, breadcrumb or object level storage. But a lot of you with your Synology NAS are going to spend a lot of time on creating users, creating security credentials, creating active shares, creating a layout for your perfect system. And although you've got things like RAID as a safety net, you've got backups that will allow you to restore the data from all these different sites, all of that extra work you put into your configuration may well be lost. If you've created a Synology account, you can go ahead via the Synology account settings to back up a lot of those configuration options, but it still doesn't save a lot of the shared data and the layout and the apps and more. For that, you need to head back into Hyper Backup, select Entire System Backup, which is only supported targeting another Synology NAS. Go ahead and either back up to the cloud or select another Synology NAS. Again, all of these steps are going to seem remarkably similar. You need to add the remote access credentials of the NAS you are targeting, and from there, make sure that the port number you are utilizing is correct, and of course, add the login credentials to allow you to back up the entire system image of your Synology NAS onto another Synology NAS. Currently, it doesn't support use of third-party servers, and you can only use this feature by backing up an image-level whole-scale breakdown of your Synology NAS onto another Synology NAS or on that Synology cloud service there. And again, if you want to go through that in even more detail and even more customization, I strongly recommend using Synology Active Backup for Business, as it will not only allow you a larger scale and control of those backups, but you can also back up multiple Synology NASs incoming, not just manage the outgoing. And that same goes for the physical server. So just keep in mind that Hyper Backup is utilized for when you want to back up data within the NAS going out, and utilize Active Backup Suite for backing up client devices and other NAS devices coming in. If you're still unsure about which of these methods, whether it is utilizing Active Backup, Hyper Backup, USB Backup or Cloud Backup best suits your needs, I've linked to a number of different videos on this subject below. And indeed, if you do want to back up your whole Synology NAS with Active Backup Suite and Hyper Backup, all of those options are present in the video you're seeing on screen that will be linked below. Alternatively, there's my article here that goes into more detail about all of those different methods, the recommended pros and cons of each of them, and exactly how to set them up. Again, that will be linked in the description. But this is the end of part 3 in our video series on setting up your Synology NAS right the first time in terms of backups and synchronization. Stay tuned for the next part in this series. We'll be breaking down a lot more into individual applications and services towards multimedia and more. If you need further support, of course, you can take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares, as mentioned in other videos. Take advantage of the NAS Builder to find out the right tool for your needs. Go to any one of the recommended third-party and first-party forum and support portals. Use the free advice section for 3 to 5 days free working day support, or go ahead and use the expedited service if you choose. Use the Ask.NAS Compares forum for more assistance, or use the Ko-Fi membership program or our services for things like expedited support and Zoom consultations. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.